Some superheroes are labeled as being ridiculous, and often useless as a result. But while they may not be the right pick for every team or every mission, some of these heroes are actually more powerful than you think. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It's me, Amanda. What superhero do you love despite the fact that others might deem them useless? And why? Number 10. Matter Eater Lad. Ah, the good old Matter Eater Lad. While definitely one of the most ridiculous powers, there are certain circumstances where Matter Eater Lad can come in super handy. He can eat anything, so if there is something blocking your way or you're trapped, Matter Eater Lad might actually be able to get you where you need to be or help you escape. And pre-0 hour Matter Eater Lad could actually also consume matter at an accelerated rate, both eating super fast and digesting super fast. So not only can he eat materials deemed indestructible because he can literally eat anything, but he can also eat an unlimited amount of matter thanks to his super fast digestive system. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love superheroes that kind of have, are deemed useless and have fun, weird powers, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Bailey Hoskins. Bailey Hoskins is another hero who really is quite useless, but happens to have one extremely useful superpower, at least in the right circumstance. It was extremely useful the one time he was able to use it. Bailey Hoskins is a mutant who hails from another reality, appearing only in the comic X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. In case you were wondering, Bailey is the one who is, considered the worst X-Man ever. His power causes him to self-destruct, but because using it would kill him, it's really never expected that he'll use it. Ergo, the most useless X-Man ever. However, that being said, because no one expects him to ever use it, Riches ends up being easily defeated by Bailey when he does decide to use his powers on him to end Rich's fascist reign. Bailey, of course, has to sacrifice himself to do this, but seeing this as probably his best shot at making his life meaningful and actually getting to be a hero for once, Bailey decides to take it. And while he doesn't live to tell the tale, he does successfully save the day. Number 8. Rainbow Girl. Rainbow Girl is another hero who gets a lot of flack when it comes to her powers. And honestly, I get it. Rainbow Girl is kind of the worst, especially if we're talking about the weird sexism that's implied in her power set and in her character. Rainbow Girl basically can manipulate the emotions of others, with various colors representing different emotions, kinda like the various lanterns. And in fact, that might not even be all she can do. She can basically just harness the awesome power of emotions, whatever that means. Instead of harnessing the power of an emotion to create light-based energy constructs, Rainbow Girl can instead kinda use her power to channel that emotion. While in her first appearance in Adventure Comics issue 309, we see her get rejected from the 30th century based Legion of Superheroes, her powers have been shown to be useful at times. She can actually manipulate the emotions of others apparently, and at one point is apparently able to use them to make everyone desire her. However, we need to acknowledge that while useful, this power set comes with one very big drawback, which is also where a lot of the sexism comes in, to be honest: mood swings. Rainbow Girl as such has never really carried forward in the comics because her very existence seems to imply that girls are both emotional and therefore often irrational. Yikes. That being said, I feel like the idea of utilizing the power of the emotional spectrum is super cool. That's also kind of why we have, lanterns. If it weren't for the execution here, this could be a cool character. Take away some of the weird implications created by her character and her power set, and seeing someone like Rainbow Girl team up with various lanterns while not really belonging to any corps herself, it could be a cool time. If she was just, not the way she was. We need to fix some things, but I do think the idea of emotions as power is really cool. Number 7. Sandman. I love Wesley Dodds, and this might be a hot take, but while I would say Dodds did quite a bit of good as the Sandman of the 1940s, as we later learn, kind of filling in for Dream, although this was likely unbeknownst to many who were called upon by the universe to do so during Dream's imprisonment, as Sandman, Dodds would use his intellect to craft equipment and create chemicals to use in combat that would render his enemies unconscious. Hence his name, because like the mythical Sandman, Dodds' Sandman would also, put you to sleep. However, without the power of his prophetic dreams, Dodds also wouldn't really be a superhero at all. It was this power that gave him purpose and motivated him to become the Sandman, so I would say it was so useful that it actually took a rather ordinary fellow and made him into something more extraordinary. Of course, that being said, Wesley Dodds I believe also served in the military, so he was a hero in that way, but he wasn't a superhero until he became Sandman. Number 6. Color Kid. Color Kid isn't usually someone you think of when you think of, you know, useful powers, and yet Color Kid actually worked really hard to master his powers. While there are actually tons that he has accomplished, many still think of him as useless in modern comics. Admittedly, the reboot of the continuity didn't really help him out here. However, pre-Crisis and pre-Zero Hour, his powers were more useful than you might think. In the 1966 Adventure Comics issue 351, he showcases just what he can accomplish by changing the color of a kryptonite cloud that is threatening Superboy and Supergirl, preventing them from flying. The cloud is made of green K, but Color Kid, using his powers, is able to change it to blue K, which must also affect it on a molecular level, as it no longer therefore has any effect on Superboy or Supergirl. The implication here also implies that Color Kid could in the future use his powers to help many Kryptonian heroes when they are faced with kryptonite problems, or likewise to help out Green Lanterns back when they had their weakness to all things yellow. So he could be actually really useful.
But switching over to DC for this next point, when an alien race has all their food infected by microbes, instead of going extinct as you might expect, they actually evolved to be able to eat unlimited amounts of any form of matter to survive instead. Yes, welcome to Planet Bismol, home to Legion of Superheroes member Tenzil Kem, better known as Matter Eater Lad. In addition to being able to eat unlimited amounts of like pretty much anything, Matter Eater Lad can also analyze matter's contents, determine if it contains poisons, metabolize his food quickly in order to obtain super speed, and use his special Bismolian digestive enzyme in order to make tough materials like steel easier to consume. Now, look, I'm not casting any doubt on how useful that power can and has been. Matter Eater Lad has used his powers to break his team out of prison cells and eat entire asteroids that were set to destroy civilizations. But Bismolians are barred from eating other people, or they get their teeth removed. So any fighting ability this guy has is not on par with his eating ability, and it's not on par with other members of the Legion of Superheroes, even a tiny little bit. But going back to Marvel, some members of Marvel's mutant population are pretty unique, and Maggot is definitely among them. Instead of having a digestive system, the mutant known as Maggot's body is essentially the home of two pretty big blue maggot-like creatures who are able to leave his body, eat anything they want, then crawl back into his guts, nourishing him and helping him grow in size, stamina, and speed. First of all, that's absolutely disgusting. But secondly, this presents a pretty big problem. That being that unless he has pre-gamed his fight, Maggot will need to hang back and find something for his maggots to consume to give him enough power to actually enter the fight. And then on top of everything, the slugs need to enter through his stomach in a very meticulous, precise manner to even be properly effective. And if they are separated from Maggot long enough, he literally will perish. His powers are very dependent on who is writing him and who he is fighting, as a smart enough villain will be able to take advantage of his massive weakness with a quickness. I guess on the plus side though, Maggot does have another power, being able to see things from the recent past or the immediate future, but there are plenty of other characters that can do the same thing and do it even better. Coming into our third from last spot today, listen. For a guy named Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards is pretty damn useless when it comes to a fight. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Reed here is on a team with a guy who can burn as hot as the sun, a rock monster who can trade punches with the Incredible Hulk, and a woman who can turn invisible and control invisible, near impenetrable force fields, which she has used to not only defend her and others, but even destroy people's brains. What Reed lacks in fighting ability is made up for by his teammates, leaving him to use his absolutely fantastic mind to lead his team and save the day by tackling the side of the conflict that has the least amount of physical conflict as possible. possible. He can use his powers offensively, obviously, and has on multiple occasions, but we all know it's not where his true strength lies. And I think the alternate reality version of this character known as the Maker is a perfect example of this, as even as a villain, the Maker uses deception, trickery, carefully thought out plans, and much more capable villains to get his work done. And second from last today, when Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, was originally part of the Avengers, he did not enjoy fighting at all. Hank, a genius scientist, was surrounded by physically powerful, confident, and self-assured men and women who were much more capable and impressive than he was. And he wanted to impress his girlfriend, Janet Van Dyne, who arguably also became much more powerful than him. So, Hank used his knowledge over Pym particles to grant himself the ability to shrink, grow, and control insects with his powers. While those abilities are all incredibly useful, it doesn't mean he's actually good at fighting. When you are small enough that your opponent can't see you, or big enough that your opponent just can't realistically face you, it doesn't make you a good fighter, it just gives you an extreme advantage. And it's been proven time and time again that even when he's big or small, Hank Pym can still be brought back to reality by a capable enough villain or even a fellow hero. And he's also not really that great of a guy to begin with. His biggest claims to fame are how smart he is, but not really, because he created Ultron, and being horrible to his wife. But finally, coming in at our top spot today is a Green Lantern. But while the Green Lanterns as a whole are incredibly powerful characters, with their rings being one of the most powerful devices in the universe, the Green Lantern known as Gnort, or Nort if you want to call him that, is just not up to snuff. Gnort got his ring as a fluke and eventually came to Earth to join up with the Justice League International, and he basically became their pet and the butt of like 90% of their jokes. But unlike actual superhero pets, Gnort was not an animal. He is an alien. He's also not cute at all, and he was probably the most annoying of anyone on that team. Kind of like a chihuahua. What is even the point of those dogs? I don't get it. Gnort was literally so disliked that Maxwell Lord created a whole new team, Justice League Antarctica, and Gnort was the only member completely unaware that it was all just a ruse to get him to go away. You know how bad you have to be as a Green Lantern that people will come up with ridiculous ways to get rid of you? Even Guy Gardner was more effective, and everyone hates him. I kind of almost feel bad for Nort. Almost. Not really. For our first pick of the day, it's actually gonna be Wonder Woman. Now, before you jump on me in the comments, you should probably know that we are talking about the OG original JSA version of Wonder Woman. Shout out to Rodney Lindsay in the comments of part 1 of this list for the suggestion. But let's just get it out of the way right now. Wonder Woman is probably the first person that I would choose to fight for me if I had to pick. She is a warrior bound, probably the most useful combatant the Justice League has. But when Wonder Woman was part of the Justice Society back in the 40s, she was arguably the most powerful hero on the team, and yet the JSA put her in the position of secretary. When the JSA introduced Wonder Woman as their first female member in All-Star Comics number 8 from 1941, Diana was originally an honorary member and was made secretary of the team. Future issues of All-Star Comics would even start with a roll call that emphasized the fact that Wonder Woman was just the secretary to the Justice Society of America. She was forced to be held back on multiple missions and wasn't given a serious role on the team for years. Meanwhile, she could probably completely wreck every single member of the team in a one-on-one fight. I think we are all glad that she finally got the respect she deserved eventually. Now, some superheroes aren't strictly superheroes. Some are a little more ambiguous with the morality, and one of those characters would have to be the Asgardian god of mischief, Loki. While Loki is more than capable in many different ways, being an amazingly capable magician and tactician who is known to be more than proficient with a blade from time to time, problem is, more than half the time, they aren't really doing any fighting at all. Loki is more prone to finding any way possible to sidestep actually fighting someone, and then when they do fight someone, they almost never play fair, and more often than not, it will not be some kind of hand-to-hand shot-for-shot fight. Loki plays to their strengths, and those strengths are deception, trickery, and staying out of the line of fire and letting other people take the hits, assuming that they don't just betray you completely. And yet, Loki, especially recently, is someone who is so powerful that they can change literal events in time. But moving on from Loki, Mr. Immortal is the leader and founder of the Great Lakes Avengers, and he is one of the only members of a superior form of human evolution known as Homo Supreme. As a more evolved form of humans than even the mutants, you'd expect Craig Hollis to have an amazing power, and he does. Craig here literally cannot bite the dust no matter what happens. Craig just gets better and walks it off. Mr. Immortal has been stated to be destined to be the last living being in the universe, merging with the sentience of the cosmos, surviving beyond the end of time and moving on into the next iteration of everything. That's awesome. Unfortunately, it means diddly squat when he gets into a fight. Craig's only real strength when it comes to fighting is being used as a human shield. And the worst part is that when he eventually revives and comes back to the world of the living, he almost always just has a big old temper tantrum that only particular characters can calm down. Being an immortal character, he has experience and obviously some leadership ability, but when it comes to a fight, do not count on him for anything but taking one for the team. Now moving on, the character of Jin Genie, who appeared as a member of the Ecstatics team, was a mutant, and usually that's already a few points in the power department, which is especially true here as Becca Parker had the power to generate seismic vibrations, which is an awesomely powerful ability, until you learn that the level of her power is directly proportionate to how much liquid courage she has consumed. As you can imagine, being intoxicated in order to use your superpowers can be rather interesting. It seems like one of the things that you should add to the list of things you shouldn't do while under the influence. Don't drive, don't operate heavy machinery, don't use your superpowers to cause earthquakes, that normal kind of thing. Unfortunately, we do not get to see her use her powers much, or get an explanation for why her power is the way it is, because Jin Genie is stricken with unliving in the same comic book that she's introduced, X-Force number 116 in July of 2001. But while some people can create earthquakes while under the influence, other people are just really good at making loud noises. And for ham radio operator Jerry Carstairs, it's the latter. Frustrated by the apparent inaction of America against crime, Jerry here developed a costume with a built-in speaker system loud enough to shock and deafen anyone crossing his path, and he stepped into the superhero world as the Thunderer. The problem here is that while his power system was strong enough to actually crumble buildings, he didn't really have the kind of control that one might need to actually keep innocent people out of harm's way. So sure, his power did actually defeat villains like a deformed dwarf who had a vendetta against good-looking people and used Morse code through the radio to end people's lives. I don't even understand that, but wait! No, Jerry's powers were actually used to end the dwarves' operations. Instead, it was actually an accidental house fire that defeated the bad guy in that story. Jerry would go on to rebrand as the Black Avenger, and he fought against the Axis powers until Red Skull wiped him out alongside a number of heroes using the Cosmic Cube.
There's not a lot to say about Ugly John, because he made, I think, a total of 2 appearances in Marvel Comics back at the turn of the century before biting the dust. Look, it's just kinda sad that his friends named him Ugly John, and his real name is just Steve. Get better friends, dude. Ugly John had 3 faces, which would make you think he had 6 eyes, but he actually only had 4 because his faces melded together. So his peripheral vision and smelling capabilities must have been amazing, but other than that, there's not a lot that you really want here and not a lot that you'd want to put on a big screen. So there are tons of superheroes who can fly, many who resemble birds, but there's only one guy who resembles birds and cannot fly. Unfortunately for Beak, he's a rather hideous bird person who can barely take flight at all, to the point of it being hardly worth mentioning. Functionally, he's a sad character who ends up in the remedial class, but he eventually gets the chance to spread his rather puny wings to take on the role of hero. Granted, he's not much more than an example of how a bad mutation can really make things bad. Prism is an interesting character with a rather impressive superpower. He can absorb and refract all forms of energy directed his way. Of course, the energy needs to be light-based, because if he's nailed with anything like kinetic energy, he shatters into a million pieces. So that's exactly what happened in a fight where Cyclops nailed him with his optic blasts. He deflected the energy without any problem, only to shatter when Jean Grey threw him against a wall. Fortunately, he's always being cloned, but every time he returns, it's not long before he's just a pile of brokenness one more time. At some point, the mutations on the roster in X-Men comics became an exercise in body horror, and no mutant is a better example of that Mass, then Maggot, which that's with 2 T's folks, a South African named Japheth. Maggot was a man with blue skin whose digestive system was comprised of 2 lung-sized techno-organic maggots. These maggots lived in his abdomen, and they could venture far away from Maggot while connected telepathically to him. This enabled them to read the past of any object they consumed, whether sentient or not. It's unclear how a mutation made several of his actual organs into machines, but hey, if we're gonna let Colossus get away with it, we'll have to forgive Maggot. But we're not gonna be forgiving anybody for naming the maggots, cause it's a bad joke. Eeny and meeny and miny, no. Living life with a perpetually clean slate was Forget-Me-Not's curse. No matter who he talked to or what he did, the second he was out of sight, he was out of mind. Videos erased themselves, conversations were forgotten. Forget-Me-Not was cursed as one of the most peculiar and obscure X-Men characters, the living embodiment of Schrodinger's cat. So once people took their eyes off of him, even for just a second, they forgot he existed. Completely. Now he and Professor Xavier discovered a psychic workaround where the professor created a psychic reminder that prompted him to recall the unfortunate mutant's existence, but this died with Xavier. So despite his powers, potential for villainy, Forget-Me-Not was always loyal and decent, and was cast as a hero in several rewritten stories, but everybody always forgets he's there. You don't want that in a movie. That's too much of a repetition. It doesn't matter how many self-aware jokes Brian Michael Bendis makes about Fabio Medina's mutant power set, it doesn't change the fact that all he can do is generate giant gold bouncy balls from nothing that make a ploink noise when they hit something. Yep, that's it. That's the whole thing. He creates a bunch of balls that are kind of in the way, but not an actual hindrance. So he came to be, I think, around 2013, and his mutant power really only creates an annoying obstacle for somebody, and then it goes away after a short period of time. Sure, he did get a chance to hang out with Miles Morales, so great for him, and he tries his hardest, but no, it's not gonna happen. Bailey Hoskins is a mutant who resided in the reality of Earth TRN 656 as opposed to the main continuity, and he was a nobody. Didn't stand out, wasn't special, didn't matter to anybody. And then one day they're like, hey, you're a mutant. What's his power? Well, it's a doozy. So Bailey can explode, but he can only explode once. He was essentially a human firework. But after that happened, there was no way he could ever regenerate. So he's just kind of sitting around waiting for that day where he's going to, I guess, willingly end his life, because that's going to be it for him. iBoy is pretty self-explanatory. He's a student at the Jean Grey School who's a regular teenager who is literally covered with human eyeballs. So his body is about like 40 to 60% just little eyes, depending on who's drawing him. Which not only looks like something out of a Guillermo del Toro movie, but must make him incredibly ineffectual in the field. So one of his primary abilities is his enhanced vision, which sure can be used as microscopic vision, x-ray, thermal, and many other types of enhanced vision. And while iBoy has so many eyes to choose from, it does allow him to see from a lot of different angles. So how does this all apply? Well, he can examine micro-expressions, he can see body language up close, he can see other nonverbal cues, so he's really good at reading people psychologically. So yes, he does have a little bit of usefulness, but then when you add in the physical presence of all those eyes, because that means he would also have eyes on the soles of his feet that he's walking on at all times, and also eyes in places you don't want eyes. Like, there's no way iBoy isn't constantly walking around with a migraine, or at least 2/3 of his eyes out of commission, because, well, you could get dust on them, or, clothes. So yeah, sure, he can see all of that, but when you combine that with like how he looks visually, I don't think he's making it to the big screen. So there isn't a lot to talk about when it comes to Long Neck. Look, I think he was supposed to be a joke, created by Grant Morrison and Phil Jimenez during their time on New X-Men, because his entire power set is really easy to explain. William Hanover had a neck that was slightly longer than usual, so he became Long Neck. Not to be confused with Jeannie Martin, who also had a really long neck and was a mutant. But that neck snapped under its own weight, which makes it kind of more interesting. Look, when your sole mutant power is having an abnormally large neck, you're not of much use to a creative team looking to come up with situations for a new team of superheroes. It's just not in the cards. I don't even think he'd be useful as like quick kill-off fodder. Think about it. If mutations hit around the same time as the onset of puberty, does that mean that Long Neck had a normal sized neck until he was like 13 and now he's like a giraffe? Or was he born with an abnormally long neck that just never stopped growing? The world may never have an answer to this enigma. Turns out, alongside many of Morrison's new X-Men, he was depowered by Scarlet Witch on M-Day. So we're assuming he's got a normal neck now. Don't cover me with that hook. I promise. Buried in the pages of John Morris's 2015 book, The League of Regrettable Heroes, half-baked heroes from comic book history, down among bizarre creations like Dr. Hormone, Fat Man the Human Flying Saucer, and Kangaroo Man, is a superhero born out of a licensing deal between Marvel Comics and the National Football League. His name is NFL Super Pro, and if you've never heard about him, well, I think the NFL might be kind of happy. The alliance remains a lesson in how not to turn a licensed product into a sustainable comic book franchise. Look, sometimes corporate synergy is seamless, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes you get a mess like this. Born out of a very questionable desire to align the National Football League, so the NFL, with the considerably less popular comic book industry of the 90s, Phil Grayfield was technically a canonical superhero, even if he was like 87% ads. A former NFL player in his own right, Grayfield's career ended when he saved a young human from a terrible mishap and was injured in the process. So after that, he became a sports reporter and just so happened to be interviewing a genius chemist slash sports memorabilia enthusiast when wrongdoers bust in. Grayfield accidentally knocks some special chemicals onto an already indestructible custom football uniform, and the combination transformed him into a superhero. So as Super Pro, Grayfield was basically invulnerable, allowing him to literally tackle baddies by just running into them and knocking them over repeatedly. Despite these obvious limitations, Super Pro managed team-ups with the likes of Spider-Man, and he was never expressly written out of continuity, so he could still be out there in the comics, but I don't think Marvel's gonna pay for the rights to bring him onto the big screen.
While some have disagreed with me on Constantine, I think this one is a pretty universal pick from DC Comics. Detective Chimp is actually a pretty impressive hero, to be real with you. He is considered to be one of the world's greatest detectives, with his skills even rivaling that of Batman. He is supremely intelligent, but Bobo also isn't especially skilled in combat, and he often tends to be inebriated, which makes him not particularly well suited to a fight when he does end up in one. He's incredibly smart, but also often kind of a mess, which is why he makes my cut. Continuing on with another hero who I often feel gets overlooked, despite how powerful he truly is, we have Cypher. Look, I love Cypher, but at the end of the day, he's just not the best fighter. Even though I think people forgot that he was at one point the best fighter, because he used to be able to understand fighting as though it were a language, because that's his mutant power, and of course using that logic, he should actually be an incredible dancer as well. Is Doug an incredible dancer? Has this ever been confirmed in canon? If you're a mega New Mutants fan or a mega just Doug Ramsey fan and you know, let me know, because I need to know about this. And if this isn't a thing yet in canon, I am asking Marvel to make it so. Let it be known. Someone at Marvel on this, please make this happen. If you're watching this, Marvel, anyone from Marvel, please help a Doug fan out. I know some of you watch. I know some of you do. So yes, in theory, he actually should be a good fighter, but during the Otherworld tournament in Ten of Swords, it seems like this aspect of his powers was dropped, changed, or just straight up forgotten. Doug was back to pretty much square one fighting when training with magic. Really though, I don't hate that change because Cypher is already powerful enough without being a master of physical combat. I don't think he needs it. He can communicate with technology, understand any language, and it's this power set that made him an essential part of Krakoa. Seriously, without him, Krakoa would have actually never been able to happen for the mutants. He was the only one who could communicate with the sentient mutant island. Why he's gone now, probably. As with Wonder Man having power doesn't necessarily mean you always want to use it, or even in some cases, best know how to utilize it, perhaps. This is something our next hero encapsulates, whose interests usually lie elsewhere when it comes to just how he approaches and deals with conflict. Despite being a new god, which you'd think would make him OP, and in fact, honestly it should, Mr. Miracle isn't often known for his fighting prowess. New gods are extremely powerful, godlike aliens. Darkseid is one of them, and Mr. Miracle is one too. But often, Scott-Free just prefers to escape than take someone on in a fight. It's more this preference that makes him not particularly great at fighting. He could stand and fight if he had to, but he'd usually just rather escape because it's kind of his whole thing. It makes sense when you consider his wife also being Big Barda is usually with him, and she's the one who's more skilled in combat, having once belonged to Darkseid's elite guard team of female Furies. So she's just trained in combat, she's super buff, and when you observe that Mr. Miracle also grew up hoping and planning his potential escape from the planet Apocalypse for most of his life, I mean, it kind of makes sense. This is how and why he became a master escape artist, basically, which is usually what he's more known for and what he does, despite his super strength, his durability, and sheer immortality that he gets from being a new god. I don't think I have to say too much about this next one. Destiny is a powerful precog. She can see into the future, and often her visions are quite accurate. The more likely something is to happen, the more clear it will become to her. However, she doesn't have super strength. She doesn't have combat experience or training, per se, and she is legally blind, so she probably isn't the best person to pick when it comes to, like, just a straight up fist fight. That being said, she's still an insanely powerful character, regardless of whether or not she'd win a round of fisticuffs. Like Professor X, you know what I mean? These people don't even need that. Also, she has her wife Mystique to aid her in that kind of battle. So really, Destiny is super OP, but just maybe not like punching stuff. And finally, the one I don't think anyone guessed would be on here, just because I don't think a lot of people think about this character, it's King of Cities. King of Cities is Jack Hawksmoor. When inside a massive city, he is supremely powerful. While in a city, he can communicate with that city, get it to do his bidding, and the city also bolsters his powers. He can see anything a window has seen, gazing into the past literally through it. He telepathically communicates with buildings. His senses are enhanced, he doesn't need to, and he has amazing survival instincts while in a city. He's just built to survive in cities. However, if he finds himself outside of a city, he becomes extremely weak, and in some cases can even die. So fight him in a city, he's seemingly unstoppable. Fight him outside of a city, and a mild breeze would probably just be enough to defeat him. You just stand there and he just fall over. That's about it. I've been myself, Amanda McKnight. Until next time, you stay nerdy. And if you are one of those who don't believe me that Egg is powerful, consider this. He is one of the Five. The Five are a supremely powerful group that allowed the mutants in Marvel Comics to gain control over life and death. Yeah. But at the end of the day, Fabio Medina's part in this, his mutant power, is still just sphere generation. Basically, he creates infertile eggs which can be manipulated to be used in a cloning process by the other members of the Five. It's a pretty weird power, I know. Although maybe not the weirdest mutant power out there, to be honest, but probably pretty close. What is the weirdest mutant power you can think of? For me, it's probably becoming or generating ice cream. Either of those powers. Both of those are pretty weird. Although, I might take the power to make ice cream myself, depending on what the process was, if the process was different. How about you? What mutant power would you want to have? Egg's power, which I'm not sure many of us would want, also makes him the most disposable member of the team when they are threatened, as you could get him to make some spheres in advance, and then even after he dies, you can still, just regen him using the other 4 of the 5 and the spheres that he made himself. So he gets killed the most out of those on the team. Usually voluntarily at least, but like I said, he is kind of the biggest member of this really powerful team. And now for something quite different. We head over to DC, specifically Watchmen. Rorschach is definitely a useful character in general. He happens to gather enough intel to take down one of the smartest men around who the world thought was actually a hero, Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias, by exposing him as the villain that he actually is. Or is he? Well, I guess that depends really on your opinion. In Watchmen, I'd say no one is truly like a stereotypical superhero, at least, not by our atypical standards. When we think of like superheroes like Superman or Wonder Woman, these are supremely flawed characters instead, which is kind of the whole point, I think, of Watchmen, as Watchmen is more of a commentary on like the superhero genre, rather than something that was ever really truly intended to like belong to that genre. But I digress. Regardless of how you feel about Rorschach's actions in terms of them being right or wrong, or Adrian's actions in terms of them being right or wrong, Rorschach does manage to defeat Veidt eventually by exposing his action. But at the same time, he doesn't have superpowers himself. He's just kind of an obsessive and likely crazy man. Although he would eventually accomplish his task, he doesn't live to see it carried out, as he is easily killed by Dr. Manhattan when he threatens to confess the truth of Veidt's involvement in the attack on New York through the world. And even then, it does end up coming to light, but it also takes a while before that revelation happens. If we're talking a pure fist fight, Professor X should probably not be your go-to, unless you happen to be on the astral plane, or he happens to be in a body or form where he actually has use of his legs and can, fight a little bit better. For most of his appearances, though, in the comics, he's usually without the ability to like stand up and fight. He's usually confined to his chair, unless of course he is armed with a Shi'ar exosuit. But even then, for some reason, I've always imagined the Shi'ar exosuit to move extremely slowly, because it just looks so bulky in the comics. It was like that's what I imagine in my mind. I don't know if that's how it moves. It's a comic, so it's hard for me to see it moving, but yeah. Professor X, while not known for being a skilled physical combatant, actually has the training to be. So, fun fact, Professor X is actually really good at fighting, but he's just not usually as capable when it comes to his fighting prowess, which is also why he's actually pretty good at fighting on the astral plane. But then again, this is also a character whose Ultimate Universe version was defeated by stairs, and that's not me trying to be rude, that's literally the comic. That's what it says. That being said, Charles Tails doesn't really need to be good in a fight because he could always just like stop you from fighting him altogether by wiping your memory, changing your memory, or just making you go brain dead. But that also hasn't always worked out in his favor as a tactic, to be honest. Onslaught, I'm looking at you. This next one is going to be controversial. I know some people are going to be mad with me for this one, so before you, well actually me, my fellow nerds, let me acknowledge the first part of the title of this list, powerful superheroes. What I'm really saying here is that John Constantine, or Constantine if you prefer, is one of the most powerful superheroes we have. He is one of the most resourceful characters I know of in comics. He has insane magical understanding and power. He's evaded death countless times and saved the world definitely more than once. He's tricked even the trickiest of demons, but also, yes, sometimes he's kinda useless in a fight. Now, granted, Constantine is capable, but that's not the issue here. It's more the fact that Constantine is a bit more scrappy and improvisational when it comes to how he approaches a fight. He also is a magic user, so he's honestly a bit squishy all around. And even if he happens to have everything together when he approaches combat, he's like super organized, super prepared, he has a tendency to betray his allies and his friends, often going rogue and kind of doing his own thing for his own reasons. So yeah, sometimes this makes him kind of useless, or at least not a great person to fight alongside, especially if we're asking those that he has fought alongside in the past. Most people don't trust him, even those that are closest to him, and honestly, kind of for a good reason. Coming up, someone you might not expect to make our cut, it is Wonder Man. Okay, so Wonder Man is actually really powerful, and honestly, we don't talk about him enough on the channel, which is why I'm both excited to include him here, and also a little disappointed in myself for doing so. And that is because I am about to call him useless, so sorry, Wonder Man. However, this is simply restricted to a certain time in his career where Wonder Man actually preferred to be a pacifist. So while powerful at that point in his superhero career, because he's always really powerful, be pretty useless in a fight because he just didn't want to fight, so haha. Number 5, Trinary. Trinary is another favorite of mine, and yet I can understand how some might not see her as the most useful or powerful mutant that we have, given her power set. She is able to communicate with technology and often get technology to work with her and do whatever it is that she needs. Seemingly, this actually isn't because Trinary can bend tech to her will, more that she's just able to communicate with tech and obviously knows exactly what to say to build an alliance, a connection to the technology, thereby encouraging the tech that she speaks with to actually help her with whatever she needs, of, their own volition. She might not be great in a fist fight, but if that fist fight happens to be against a computer, or if there might be a computer nearby who could be compelled to help Trinary in a fight, I mean, she's pretty useful in that regard, so yeah. And I imagine she'd be a star in a show like BattleBots, or she'd simply, just rally the bots and then free them from their human masters, create all kinds of chaos. I could see that being a thing too. Trinary's like, these tech do not want to fight for you, so they're free now. Number 4, Egg. Egg is the epitome of a mutant who is useless, but who actually winds up being also extremely useful. Egg is Fabio Medina. He used to be known by the mutant name of Goldballs, but ended up changing it after he realized that the balls that he was actually able to expel from his body as projectiles were actually infertile eggs. He ended up joining the Five on Krakoa, who are in charge of bringing back any mutants lost by following through with resurrection protocols. While not particularly useful in a fight, as proven by the fact that Egg has been killed multiple times over in the comics just recently, probably suffering the most deaths among the members of the Five, Egg is still a crucial member of this team. Without the eggs that he produces, resurrection would not be possible, hence why he is considered extremely useful. Just maybe not, super useful in a combat scenario. But if you need to be resurrected, Egg is definitely one of the 5 mutants that you should call. Number 3, Cypher. Cypher is of course a mutant who has often been put down as useless, but this was before his mutant glow up. In the last few years in the comics, we've seen a major upgrade to Cypher's power set. Initially, he was just, really good at communicating in the sense of being able to understand all languages, which, is useful, but definitely not anything special when it comes to some of the grand foes that the X-Men are pitted against. I mean, if you can just understand different languages, that's like basically having a translator on hand, so yeah. Over the years though, the meaning of his powers and the interpretation of them has changed and evolved. Eventually, Cypher also learned how to communicate with technology, and even learned how to communicate non-verbally, with fighting also being interpreted as a language that he could master. Although he hasn't recently been as present in the comics prior to Jonathan Hickman leaving his position as head of X, Cypher was probably one of the most important and influential mutants in the comics before that happened, and I would say he still kinda is. Without being in the spotlight as much, Cypher is still super important in terms of the lore and the world building that relates to Krakoa, as he is the only one that can easily communicate with and fully comprehend the sentient mutant island of Krakoa. Just can't really have Krakoa without Cypher. Forge. Forge is kinda a squishy guy, which is why he makes our cut, and not particularly well known for his skills, in a fist fight. But he is well known for making cool stuff, especially cool weapons, and because of that, he is actually extremely useful. Many also forget that Forge has experience with shamanism, and not only has a mutant origin, but an origin that is also attached to the world of magic and mysticism, which honestly is pretty cool. However, for those who want to argue that Forge could march in there alongside Cyclops, I think that I would say Forge actually prefers to outfit other heroes than do that himself. Although he could do so, I guess, if he wanted, Forge is generally best on the sidelines, and I think he knows this, helping his fellow teammates and allies to strategize their way to victory, and helping to outfit his fellow mutants to make sure they survive the battle and are left standing afterwards, no matter how tough, or likewise, how squishy they might be normally. Number 1. Dazzler. I mean, of course, we're doing a useless list, and even useless but useful, so obviously Dazzler's gonna take my number 1 spot, because she's my number 1 gal. Dazzler is taking our number 1 spot, not because of how useless she seems, but because of how truly useful her powers are, despite the fact that everyone else wants to call her useless. The only thing that really makes her seemingly useless is the fact that Alison Blair actually really prefers to use her powers for her performances, as opposed to being, the team leader of the X-Men, which honestly she easily could be. She's been an X-leader of sorts before, but not for the main X-Men team. At least, not as far as I know. Dazzler has powers that have been described before to be potentially unlimited in terms of just how much damage she could do. She can transmute sound into light, and while her light shows in her concerts might seem kinda tame if you're like, yeah, but how you gonna fight with that? She's also used her power set to defeat and defend against heavy hitters like Enchantress and the Hulk. And there's a lot of cool things she can do with that light, okay? Which I would also say means that she is honestly way more useful than people usually give her credit for. Still though, Dazzler prefers to be on the sidelines when it comes to heroics, and leave that to the professional 9-to-5 superheroes. But just remember that in a pinch, she could step in and prove herself to be even more powerful than some of the most famous mutant heroes around. Move over, Wolverine. Move over, Cyclops. It's Dazzler time. Number 10. Destiny. Truly one of the most useless, I would say at least, in a fight, Destiny is still an extremely powerful mutant. While she might not be able to kick your butt physically, she could easily destroy most of her opponents simply with the knowledge she has of the future, and using it to hurt those who stand in her way and advance her own plots. Destiny is also one of those people who is a masterful and skilled manipulator of scenarios, often choosing to keep secrets in order to make sure her plans go to plan. When Mr. Sinister attempted to eliminate the Quiet Council, or most of them anyways, Destiny proved to be one of his greatest challenges in accomplishing this feat. As soon as Mr. Sinister focused on a direct plan of attack, it actually caused Destiny's powers to trigger, allowing her to sense the future of what he was planning, thereby preventing it from coming to pass by informing others on how to best avert that disaster. When you have a precog like Destiny, she can prove very challenging to get around, especially when she's someone like Mystique protecting and guarding her too, and especially if you happen to try to target her. I think the best course of action if you're going after Destiny is try not to target her. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you also love mutants as much as I do, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Dr. Reyes. Dr. Cecilia Reyes is also a mutant, hence why she is one of the lead doctors on the mutant island nation of Krakoa. Although you might forget the fact that she's she's a mutant when it comes to the Good Doctor, because our focus is usually on her as a medical professional, as opposed to her as, a mutant superhero. When it comes to being a mutant, her powers allow her to summon a bioshield of sorts. A very tight-knit biofield forms around her, and generally also instinctively appears at a whim whenever Cecilia becomes the target of an attack. However, this isn't the power that comes in most handy with Reyes, whose real usefulness does come from her skill as a gifted doctor and surgeon, who is also more familiar with mutant genetics than most doctors would be. Although at one point I do believe Jean Grey actually declared herself an impromptu surgeon as well, speaking of mutants that can be medical people. But Dr. Reyes, I'm pretty sure, is still one of the few mutants who actually has, significant medical training and experience. Unlike Jean just walking in and being like, I'm a surgeon now. It's like, okay, Jean. You got enough going on. Number 8, Shark Girl. Shark Girl isn't particularly useless in my mind, but she also has some setbacks when it comes to her abilities, in the sense that she isn't always in control of them. And I think that we should acknowledge that, so that's why she's here. Shark Girl's mutant powers allow her to turn into a shark, and she doesn't suffer from being on land while in her shark form. She's kind of like, a shark. She's like a shark, a humanoid shark, being able to breathe both on land and underwater, but she is susceptible to the temptation of blood. Ayara can go into a bloodlust, and as a result of this, she'll actually lose control over herself and basically enter into like a bloodthirsty rage. However, that being said, I still feel like she is underappreciated when it comes to what she is capable of. Not only can she seamlessly transition from shore to sea, being just as at home in the depths of the ocean as she is on the land, but Ayara as Shark Girl also gains super strength and super speed, so yeah. Number 7, Curse. Curse is actually one of my favorite New Mutants in the comics. I love Curse. Curse is a mutant whose power forces her to curse her enemies, and if she doesn't have any enemies on hand, forces her to curse those around her. She can't keep the curses in, otherwise they basically do damage to her, and while she can control the type of curses that she grants to others or that she casts on others, performing nicer curses also seems to have a physical cost for her. So typically she has to make them kinda nasty in the interests of self-preservation. But also, Curse seems to generally enjoy making other people miserable and causing them harm to an extent, especially if it's people that she doesn't like or just simply doesn't care for. This is what makes her such an interesting and fascinating character to me, but makes her a dangerous character for most heroes to work with. The other thing I love about Curse is that she isn't really a hero, nor is she a villain. I wouldn't say she directly aligns with either side, although I could see her leaning, I guess, a little bit more towards villain if she wanted to. Currently, Curse is lending her talents for better, and I guess for worse, to the X-Men Green Team, which is a small mutant team focused on fighting aggressively to save the environment, led by Nature Girl, who recently underwent a secondary mutation after deciding that she'd basically had enough and decided to let her anger motivate her activism. Number 6, Vanisher. Vanisher is an old school mutant villain who made his first appearance all the way back in the second ever issue of X-Men. Yeah, pretty old character. Well, his power set is actually pretty wild, allowing him to seemingly teleport almost anywhere instantly, with his limitations for bringing others and the distance not yet clearly defined. He also was pretty easily defeated by the X-Men, or more specifically their mentor Professor X, the first time around. While admittedly the young X-Men did struggle against the Vanisher during their first encounter, Professor X easily capacitated and defeated Vanisher by just wiping his memory. A pretty dark way to deal with a tough villain. But I do love how weirdly easy it was for Vanisher to be defeated. Vanisher has since made some appearances in the comics, but now in modern day his powers are even less impressive considering the caliber of teleporter heroes we're now familiar with. Vanisher doesn't really stand a chance against that, despite the fact that his power set is still pretty useful because, I mean, teleporting. Still, I feel like Vanisher versus Magic, I'm gonna put my money on Magic in that one. Number 5, Starboy. Starboy was originally known to be quite powerful back in the pre-Zero Hour days, at least. An alien, he seemed to gain powers from being caught in a comet's tail. They allowed him to manipulate the density of objects and people by drawing on power from stars and using their pull to alter the gravitational pull of others. For a time, he also had additional powers that made him as powerful as Superman, possessing superhuman durability, strength, flight, and and even his own electric vision. However, over time these faded and Tom Kalor would grow up to become the future Starman. As Starman, it was revealed that Tom suffered from schizophrenia and that when he wasn't acting as a hero, he was actually living in a sanitarium and had to take medication for his condition to keep it under control. His powers are useful, but he used to be much more powerful when his power set was more akin to Superman. So, number 4, Karma. Karma probably is one of the most useful powers of all of these people on the list, and that's why she's so high up, but otherwise, you know, she's pretty squishy. Such is the case with a lot of the more psychic or psionically inclined superheroes. In fact, I was watching some Star Trek lately, TNG, aka The Next Generation, and I was just thinking a similar thing about Donna Troy, who also struggles from being, you know, sometimes super useful and sometimes not so useful depending on the scenario. I guess that's kind of a different issue, but she's also kind of squishy. You know how Donna Troy can be. She's like, I sense a presence and I know exactly what these people are thinking or feeling. Or she'll be like, I don't sense anything. It's great. Karma is a telepath, but not a super powerful one. She can read minds, thoughts, and feelings, but only to a certain level or degree. However, she also has the power to control minds, and in this telepathic ability, she generally tends to excel. So while she is squishy and not particularly gifted at reading minds, she can just take control over her enemies. There have been shown to be some restrictions on this power though. A younger Karma would struggle sometimes to maintain control for an extended period, although at other times Karma has also been shown to be able to take control of multiple minds at once. Although I do believe she can only pilot one person at a time, at least that used to be a thing, even while in possession of multiple minds, which is kind of also a drawback. Number 3, Fury. Although really we aren't quite talking about Fury, at least not one of the other versions of this character, but instead focusing on the version of her that is mainly known as Lita Hall. This version of the character seems to have moved past her origin as Wonder Woman's daughter following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, where everything kind of got weirdly reset and restructured. Instead, we know her as the daughter of Helena Cosmatos, also Fury, who was raised instead by Admiral Derek Trevor and Miss America, aka Joan Dale Trevor. She ends up becoming the partner of Hector Hall, and the two are going to have a child together when Hector tragically dies. While dead in the real world, Hector's consciousness becomes suspended in a pocket of the dream world, with Brute and Glob turning him basically into their new Sandman after Dream's imprisonment, which all happens in the Sandman series. Lita is visited by Hector in her dreams and eventually chooses to stay with him there, but their child ends up being claimed by the Dream Lord upon his return. He forces Hector's spirit to move on and then explains that one day he will actually come for Lita's child, who actually belongs to the Dreaming. Despite her Amazonian-like abilities, Lita can be seen as kinda useless, as she doesn't really act as a hero in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, and instead attempts to pursue a normal life with her son. That is until her son goes missing, and then she kind of just becomes unhinged. And she also, even before that, kinda is compromised somewhat in the sense that she gets insane anxiety when it comes to being separated from her son at any moment because of course of Dream's threat to one day come and claim him. Number 2, Destiny. Is Destiny a hero? Well, I mean, lately, I'd say, in a weird way, she kinda is. She is one of the few people who was able to stop Moira McTaggart from killing off a mutant kind, destroying them from the inside out. She's also been one of the few who was able to stand against Mr. Sinister in his many attempts to take control. However, ultimately, Destiny isn't winning that fight because we know the Sins of Sinister event is fast approaching. And Destiny is on the Quiet Council currently, which exists to try and govern Krakoa, making life for mutants on the island nation a paradise, and defending that life that the nation is built for its residents. So I'm gonna say that right now, you know, she's close enough to a superhero. I think we can count her on this list. I think we can just acknowledge that Destiny's been doing some pretty good things lately. When it comes to her power set, Destiny is kind of useless if we're talking about, you know, like a fist fight to the death. But she's extremely useful when it comes to her powers, if kept out of the action. More of a guiding light for those fighting that is, you know, better kept on the sidelines. Destiny is a precog and can use her mutant abilities to see the future. The more probable a future is, the clearer her vision of it will become, allowing her to sense which futures and outcomes are most likely. Number 1, Booster Gold. Booster Gold is kind of the epitome of what this list is about to me. His powers aren't really powers that he was born with or incurred from, a wacky lab accident gone wrong, but instead were gained through him stealing some tech in the future, which is where he's from, and using it to travel to the past. Their Booster used his tech as well as his knowledge from the future to try and become a hero, and well, he succeeded. Hooray! However, Booster isn't always the best at heroics. Case in point, the time he tried to give a gift to Batman and Catwoman in honor of their wedding. His gift was to travel back in time and prevent Bruce's parents from dying, but in doing so, this actually prevented Bruce and Selina from ever getting together, and it also caused a lot of other problems. So yeah, he's got some really amazing powers, but sometimes he isn't so great at using them super wisely. But that's part of the charm of Booster Gold as well. Number 10. Sideways. Sideways hails from DC Comics. He was introduced to be part of a new wave of original characters that DC wanted to make mainstays. Sadly, many of these characters did not end up enduring and kind of were forgotten, but that doesn't mean that they weren't cool, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to remember them, because they were cool. Maybe we should have done more with them. Sideways powers allowed him to create rifts in midair, ripping holes into space-time that he could use to teleport through. In other words, he had the ability to teleport not just through space, but also through dimensions. Pretty neat. However, he didn't have the best handle on his powers, and therefore had difficulty controlling these rifts in regards to where they would lead to. Not great considering how powerful this ability is, and how easy you can mess up the timeline with it if you weren't careful. However, it's still a pretty insane ability, and that actually wasn't all Derek James as Sideways could do. He can also manipulate gravity, creating mini black holes, and possesses superhuman strength, durability, and reflexes, as well as a healing factor. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we are doing here, and if you want more lists like this, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Number 9. Explodey Boy. Explodey Boy was one of the young mutants who fled to Genosha looking for somewhere they could thrive and be safe. However, it didn't work out too well for those mutants when Genosha was targeted by Cassandra Nova's wild sentinels, decimating the island and killing many of its inhabitants in one of the worst mutant tragedies ever. Explodey Boy was one of the mutants who perished in this attack. He has since been returned to life on Krakoa, where he was resurrected, but a zombie version of him also temporarily returned to life during the Empire event, as seen in the X-Men miniseries tie-in. His powers allow him to make things explode, known as phragokinesis, but they were not enough to protect him when the attack on Genosha happened. However, his powers did come in handy when the original, now zombified version of the character chose to sacrifice himself, blowing up to protect the life his resurrected self now had on Krakoa, which sounded all in all pretty good to him. Number 8. Trinary. Trinary is one of those mutants who is actually super useful in the right environment and on the right mission, but not every mission is going to be her strong suit. She isn't as well rounded as others because her powers are really specific. Trinary is a technopath, which is actually, I think, one of my favorite mutations out there. As a technopath, she can communicate with technology and make technology do her bidding. Although more recently in the X-Corp miniseries, which I really wish had become an ongoing series, it was so good, her powers were actually less depicted as blatant control and more depicted as Trinary kind of just asking computers and technology to work with her, and then them acquiescing because they either like her or respect her, or a combination of both. This is interesting to me, especially when you consider Mutantkind's current relationship with technology and AI, like Sentinels and Nimrod. Trinary as a technopath is not known for being exceptionally good at fighting or anything like that, and could be considered kinda squishy, unless of course she is going up against anything tech-based or happens to have tech around her which she can use to defend herself, and then she's pretty powerful. So, like I said, not powerful in some ways, powerful in other ways. Number 7. Stone Boy. Stone Boy is from DC Comics, first appearing in Adventure Comics in issue number 306 back in 1963. His power set is extremely useful as it renders him extremely strong and durable, but unfortunately, he's also kinda useless because while extremely strong and durable in his stone form, he's also immobile, or at least for a very long time was only ever really immobile. This is because while in his stone form, he was technically asleep. That's right. His alien race possesses this stone form because on their planet, the nights are actually half a year long. Their stone form is therefore used as a kind of suspended animation or stasis throughout these very, very long nights. However, Stone Boy would later find a way to be awake while in his stone form, which allowed him to become mobile in the future. Still though, what a weird but interesting power and origin. Number 6. Anarchist. Anarchist is an interesting one. He has powers that allow him to produce acid sweat. He was a part of the team originally known as X-Force before being renamed to X-Statix. This is the mutant reality TV team who films all their exploits and interactions for the purpose of basically entertainment. Now the reason I decided to go with Anarchist as opposed to Zeitgeist is because I feel like Anarchist's powers are more useful as it's easier to make yourself sweat as opposed to, you know, make yourself throw up. However, in either case you'd probably want to be well hydrated when using either of these abilities. Anarchist can build up sweat and use it to generate energy, which he disperses in acidic blasts. Anarchist recently was resurrected on Krakoa after dying a while ago in a final fight with his fellow X-Statix teammates. Number 5. Jubilee. When most people think of Jubilee, they think of the 90s X-Men animated series, I imagine. Here, Jubilation Lee was introduced to us as a bratty young mall rat teen who had run away from home and whom the X-Men came across and then decided to take in. One of the first times we see her use her powers, she accidentally destroys an arcade game in the show. But in reality, Jubilee in the animated series really only runs away from home because her foster parents sick a sentinel on her, causing Jubilee to run away for her own safety. And while she does totally destroy that arcade game, she is also young and her powers have just manifested, and she's probably feeling, you know, a bit stressed because she has no home and she has to live in a mall. Jubilee's powers in the comics would develop to a point that they were considered to be not just useful, but even some of the most powerful abilities that we've possibly seen, with Emma Frost once stating that Jubilee had the potential to cause explosions at a subatomic level. In other words, Jubilee's powers could make her as useful or as destructive as multiple nuclear power sources or weapons. That's crazy. Number 4. Starman. For this point, we are talking about Ted Knight's Starman. I would argue that Ted Knight is kinda useless in the sense that he doesn't really have superpowers per se, but what he is good at doing is inventing stuff. He's a scientist, and he's a really good scientist, which makes him a powerful ally to other heroes. He also has used this equipment himself to be a hero, hence the name Starman, but really I would say his genius intellect is simply more valuable than his own superheroic nature. Not knocking Ted and his accomplishments, and I wouldn't call him useless per se, although that is the name of the list, but he doesn't have any natural superpowers, and I think he's been more useful in recent years acting as a mentor for younger heroes, namely Star-Spangled Kid, Stargirl, and of course his own son Jack, also known as Starman, who all ended up using his inventions as tools to give them powers. Stargirl herself is known for her use of both Ted's Cosmic Converter Belt and Cosmic Staff. Also, Ted Knight is no longer Starman in the Prime continuity, which could also act as a point against him. Although to be fair to Ted, I think I personally prefer him as Starman to Will Payton's Starman, but yes. Also, you know, Ted got old, so that's kind of part of how life goes. He retired. Number 3. Cypher. Cypher I'd like to rank a little bit higher up on this list because calling him useless feels kind of ridiculous in modern times. By the way, the parameters for my ranking here is I kind of tried to rank the people that, you know, people see as useless but who are actually secretly like really OP as higher, so I hope that makes sense. I also feel like people calling Cypher useless is kind of mean. It's hard for me to genuinely call really anyone useless, to be honest, whether they be fictional or real world. Okay, honestly, some real world people are kinda useless, but in a fictional world, I can imagine, at least, that no one really is. I can imagine that, so just let me have it. However, Cypher is still one of those characters that people attribute as being useless, and so for that reason, we're gonna count him on this list. But of course, his powers actually happen to be some of the most useful, especially when we consider that they also apply to Cypher being able to communicate with technology and using his ability to understand and communicate in all languages to become skilled in the language of fighting, which, yeah, that's a language apparently. A physical language, get it? Except that he was once again proven to be somewhat useless during the Otherworld tournament when Maggot trained him because, well, he wasn't very good at fighting there for some reason. Which kinda contradicts the other stuff that I know, but hey. Number 2. Dazzler. Dazzler is another one of my all-time favorite superheroes. And of course she's on a useless superhero list. I like to put my favorites on lists like this because it makes me feel better about calling them useless because I know they're my favorites, so I feel like I can kinda do that. While she might seem useless to some with her power over light, which she usually prefers to use from a performance standpoint to create dazzling light effects for her concerts and stage performances, her powers are actually insane. Although I'm still kinda confused about her powers because she can turn sound into light light, which does that mean that her concerts, is there sound playing, can you still hear it? I still have questions about that. I don't know if that's been answered. If it has been answered and I missed it somewhere, please let me know in the comments. It's more that Dazzler isn't as often drawn to heroics that makes her a sometimes useless superhero. Though I will say, although she has in general preferred to try and resist the call of heroism whenever she is thrown into a mission or a scrap, she actually performs pretty admirably. And as we've learned, Alison Blair's powers are also impressive, with her power limits even being still somewhat questioned and defined in the comics in modern day, in terms of just how great they are. She's got a lot of potential. Never forget that even Galactus acknowledged how powerful Daz could be when he made her one of his heralds for a short time. In fact, he probably wouldn't have actually even released her if Daz herself hadn't requested to be free of the obligation. She was kind of the one that was like, look, like, this is cool and all, but I gotta go be a singer, so send me back, man. Number 1, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is one of my all-time favorite superheroes characters. I love Doreen, you know this, but I cannot ignore the fact that on paper, when I write it all down, her powers, her mutation, well, it does all sound pretty ridiculous. And she should, by all intents and purposes, not be as OP as we know her to be. However, that being said, I feel like we need to acknowledge the fact that her powers, or more likely her people skills, are insanely useful and insanely powerful. Squirrel Girl has the ability to befriend pretty much anyone, no matter their alignment, and is really, and I mean really, good at helping convince criminals to call it quits, either for the day or for the rest of their life, reforming them in some cases permanently, or as permanently as one can in comics, with just a quick pep talk. This means that often when Squirrel Girl is involved, she doesn't even have to fight villains to stop them. And even in the cases where she has had to fight, she has fared, in most cases, surprisingly well. So while she might seem useless, is she really? I feel like if I was picking the name for this list in terms of its title, that's really what I would call it. I would call it superheroes who seem useless but are really super powerful. So that's the true title of the list to me, in my interpretation, in my heart. That's all.